Hi guys, so for the latest leg of my Hammer pilgrimage, I decided to watch Countess Dracula, and I didn't properly do my research for this because I bought this thinking that it would be a follow-on of sorts from The Vampire Lovers, given the fact that it's got Ingrid Pitt in it, but no, totally wrong about that. This is very much a one-off film. There is a sequel to The Vampire Lovers called Lust with a Vampire, I've now discovered, but I've not seen that film. That one doesn't have Ingrid Pitt in it. Oh, the complex world of Hammer. This film doesn't even have a relative of Dracula in it, which is very strange given the title. Yeah, this has got to be one of the worst cases of misleading titledom I have ever seen. Like, if this film came out today, it would get a lot of shit on social media, put it that way. So the villain in this film is, she's based upon a real-life woman, a real-life duchess who lived in Hungary back in like the 15th or 16th century, somebody called Elizabeth Bathory or somebody like that. This woman supposedly killed dozens of servant girls and local girls from the village just for pleasure. She was a really evil woman, and she got caught in the end and imprisoned and spent the rest of her life in a dungeon or something. It's a fascinating story. Give it a read if you want, but I'd never personally even heard of this person before I watched this movie this week. Supposedly there have been 3 or 4 films based upon this woman over time, but I can't imagine any of them take as light a touch to the material as Hammer do, because this film definitely doesn't really fully explore the horror of what that situation would have been like. You know, a rich woman in a big castle just taking advantage of all these girls and torturing and killing them and stuff like that. We don't get a horror film like that. It almost feels more like a fairy tale that Hammer have gone for rather than a gothic horror film. They've even turned this version of Elizabeth into a kind of supernatural character. So at the start of this, Elizabeth is a middle-aged woman. She's very bitter and bored with her lot, and she discovers that if she puts the blood of another girl onto her face, and I'm not even going to get into explaining how this comes to pass at the start of this movie, it's a little bit silly, but she discovers that if she does this, she instantly looks like 30 years younger. She instantly looks just like Ingrid Pitt, actually. Ingrid Pitt also plays the older version of Elizabeth in this film, which I didn't realise at first. So Ingrid's having to put quite a bit of effort in on this. She's having to, presumably she would have had to spend hours in the makeup department making herself out to be an old woman, and then she would have had another session with the makeup artist to do herself up for the younger part. But there's some sort of magic going on here that makes Elizabeth into a young woman in her 20s. The trouble is it only lasts about 24 hours, 48 hours, and then she goes back to looking even older than what she did before. But by this point, she's addicted to looking young. She likes having men fawn after her again for the first time in decades. So what does she do? She just carries on killing throughout the movie. She pulls in servant girls and local prostitutes into her web of deceit and kills them off just so she can look young again for a little bit longer. She's got a couple of people who help her out with this, like a head butler character and some old spinstress or something like that. But the whole movie definitely feels very light. I never fully got into the horror of this. There are kills going on, but some of them are off camera, and even the ones that we do see, I just didn't feel it somehow. It starts with the costumes and the set design, I think. This film managed to pinch some sets from some other film that was happening close to when this was made, and they've also managed to pinch some costumes from the same film, but the costumes are more like period drama costumes. They're very colourful and extravagant, and they don't fully set you up for any kind of Dracula's castle type film, really. And just the tone of it. I mean, there was at least one point in this film where it wouldn't have surprised me if Elizabeth had looked in a mirror and said, "Mirror, mirror on the wall, who is the fairest of them all?" And the mirror would have replied, "Well, you, my lady, because you look like Ingrid Pitt back in her heyday." I literally did think of the evil woman from Snow White. And if you made this film into a pantomime, it wouldn't feel that much of a stretch. I could easily picture Ingrid Pitt and the head butler type character stood together on a stage, and this guy saying to the audience, "This woman's not really a middle-aged woman in disguise, is she?" And the audience going, "Oh yes she is. No she's not. Oh yes she is." It would just feel natural to take this script and move it onto the stage like that. The best thing about this film is probably the individual performances. As bad as Ingrid Pitt is at commentary tracks, and I'll definitely come back to that a bit later on, as an actress she's pretty damn good for somebody who is primarily there because of her looks. When I compare her to all the other lead actresses in Hammer films, I think she would at least be halfway up that league table, and I definitely see in her an improvement in her self-assuredness on screen since she did the Vampire Lovers. She's playing multiple roles in this, and she just looks like she's really embracing it and enjoying it, and is totally comfortable with all the responsibilities she has with this film. There's another cutie in this. Her name is Lesley-Anne Down, who I'd only previously seen before as a much older actress. In this, she plays like a princess who is on her way to sort of inherit Elizabeth's castle, kind of. But Elizabeth has her rounded up and put in a hut in the woods, and so there's a little bit of like a Man in the Iron Mask type subplot going on here. But Lesley-Anne Down's very good in the few scenes that she gets. She definitely showcases her potential talent, and she would go on to have a pretty decent career. She went on actually to be in the very well-known Death Wish 5. Yeah, she was in the absolute worst Death Wish film. Very unlucky for her. And also, she was in what I think is one of the worst daytime soap dramas ever made, Sunset Beach, a show that was so bad, me and my friends at university used to tune into it to watch it just to take the piss out of it. It was so cheesy and shit. So, for whatever reason, Lesley-Anne Down has the knack of being in all the worst stuff, but I'm sure she's done good stuff as well. But even with this film, this isn't a bad film, but the Hammer vampire films are pretty good all across the board, really. The Dracula ones, the non-Dracula ones, it's a very good bunch of films. And even though this film is reasonably good, it's still probably towards the bottom end of the league table of Dracula films, if you like. So even with this, Lesley-Anne Down has been a little bit unlucky, starting as she means to go on. But the best performance in this film, bar none, is actually from one of the guys, Nigel Green, who plays the head butler who's in league with Elizabeth. He's not actually called the head butler in the film, that's just what I think of him as. But I've never seen this actor before, but he is absolutely superb. Looking at his filmography, he's been in some films in the 60s that I've not seen that I would like to see. A Vincent Price film, at least one Amicus film. It just so happens I've never seen him before, but absolutely fantastic. He's like a 60s version of Liam Neeson almost, with his large gait and just the way that he moves around the set. And he's playing an interesting character in this because, yes, he's playing the villain, but you can see the contradiction in him, that his facial expressions and stuff. He wants to be with the Ingrid Pitt character, Elizabeth, but at the same time he's got his doubts. He knows that all this stuff is wrong, but he just can't help himself because he loves this woman so much. He just about swerves to the dark side throughout the film rather than the light side, and that's because ultimately, that's how ultimately he ends up at the back end of this film, in chains, in the dungeon with Elizabeth and a third person as well, the older maid, who I think is very unlucky to end up in the same predicament as the other two, come the conclusion of this, because I didn't really think that old maid was a villain as I was watching the film, but I guess she was sort of complicit in a lot of the bad stuff going on in this. She didn't really speak up. But going back to Nigel Green, what an absolutely terrific performance he puts in this film. And I always say when I review these older films that there's usually one person in the cast who got really unlucky and died young, and unfortunately we have another one of those people here. Nigel Green died just a couple of years after making this movie at the age of 47. Very, very tragic, but I'm certainly looking forward to checking out one or two of his other films that he made before his untimely death. Unfortunately, our main hero in this turns out to be a little bit of a damp squib. His name is Lieutenant Imre Hoth. Technically, I guess he's good looking, but that is literally where his suitability to be a hero ends, because this character is just very, very reckless and stupid. So picture the scene, right? This is a guy who is a guardsman or a soldier of some description, and in this film he wins the heart of the Countess. So basically he gets with a woman who is extremely wealthy and looks like Ingrid Pitt. and he doesn't know that this woman is secretly a 65-year-old, okay? What is his response to essentially winning the jackpot? He goes to the local tavern and gets with a prostitute. Now, this would be bad enough if it was a case of him picking up a prostitute and going around the back of the tavern and having her up against a wall. Yes, that would be completely despicable, but at least he might get away with it, right? No, he takes this prostitute to the castle where the Countess lives to have his wicked way with her. Yes, he's very drunk, and yes, he's being egged on to a point by the Nigel Green character, but still, he takes this prostitute to the Countess's castle and ends up in a bedroom with her just down the hall from where the Countess sleeps. Utterly reckless. Now, they don't end up doing the deed because Hoth is completely wasted at this point, but the prostitute gets naked and gets on top of him, and there's a few shenanigans going on. Yes, he's completely out of it, but that's not really going to wash with any woman, really, is it? You know, you're not going to say, oh, yeah, okay, yes, I ended up in bed with a prostitute and we were sort of naked, but we didn't do anything. So, you know, it's not that bad, is it, really? No, that's not going to work, you know. So this is meant to be our hero, our Sir Galahad of the piece, you know, and he ends up in a bedroom with a prostitute half naked. So it's the most bizarre avenue for this character to go down halfway through the film when he seems quite sensible up to that point. Now, I know that all this is probably a ploy to get the prostitute to the castle so she can be offed, she can be the latest victim, but still, when you look back on this whole bit of the story, it's so bizarre. The whole romance with Toth, or is it Hoth, the whole romance between him and Elizabeth just falls a little bit flat in general, because you know that this is secretly a 60-something woman who's rolling around with this guy. You can't really get into it in the same way that you would if it was just, you know, a couple of genuinely young people having a little bit of a romance while they try and stay one step ahead of whoever the villain is. On the whole, I did like this film, but it's certainly one of the lesser of Hammer's vampire films, as I said earlier. You know, I think if it had just had the title of, say, The Horror of Elizabeth Bathory or something like that, you know, set its stall out as being a completely different type of thing to what Hammer normally do, I think I might have just appreciated it more. But because it was clearly like a Dracula offshoot project that just got totally messed up at somewhere along the lines and ended up like being this, it's just weird, and it just leaves a little bit of an unsavoury taste in the mouth. Before we wrap up, I'll quickly show you my copy of Countess Dracula. Here it is. This is a Blu-ray and it looks terrific. Audio, picture, superb. Lots of features on this as well. There's an audio commentary with Ingrid Pitt and horror experts Kim Newman and Stephen Jones. I'll come back to that in a sec. There's also a bunch of other stuff, theatrical trailer, archive interview, 50 years of Hammer, news feature, and other things. I'm not going to list them all. This copy of the film also comes with a booklet, which I didn't expect. I like it when Blu-rays come with booklets. It doesn't happen that often, but with this film, it did. Now, that commentary track, Jesus Christ, really cringeworthy to listen to. So you've got Ingrid Pitt and these other two guys who I'm pretty sure are dab hands at doing commentary tracks. I'm sure I've heard them do commentary tracks for other movies. I think they're well practiced at it. But Ingrid Pitt, clearly not. She's just turned up for this track and she's happy to criticise everybody and everything and just lay into that person, lay into this person. She's complimentary as well about various other things, but there's absolutely no filter on her whatsoever, and you can tell that the other two guys are just squirming in their chairs. Like, I bet 20 minutes into this they were like, Jesus Christ, we've got another hour of this, and they're desperately trying to keep things on the straight and narrow, and Ingrid's just throwing a spanner in the works at every 5 seconds by she keeps on saying controversial things, and I guess it's entertaining, but it was also cringeworthy. So if you're not the sort of person who normally listens to commentary tracks, you might want to check this one out, because I think you'll find it quite entertaining. And so there we have it. So it's time to get to the bag of terror and find out what sort of score I'm going to give Countess Dracula. So we've got 1, 2, 3 bloody axes out of 5. I'll give it this much, just for being extremely entertaining, albeit it certainly has its flaws and it's definitely a messy movie. So there we have it. I'll leave it there for today. I'll be back soon to do another Hammer film. I don't know what will be the next one I will tackle. Maybe Lust for a Vampire, who knows. Right, until next time, cheerio, bye-bye.